Welcome to 101. I'm Greg Bassey, your host from the Salisbury Independent newspaper. It's a big day here at PAC 14. We've got a newsmaker with us today, Anthony Gutierrez, who's the director of the Board of Elections in Wycomico County. Welcome, Anthony.
Thank you.
So I got something in my mail this week. It looks to me like it's a mail-in ballot. So tell me what is going on with our elections coming up with the primary on June 2nd.
Yes, with the COVID-19 crisis, the governor did change the date of the Maryland primary from April 28th to June 2nd. He also approved the State Board of Elections plan to change that to a mail-in ballot election. But there is a provision that on Tuesday, June 2nd, we will be opening one vote center in Wycomico County for primarily the intent the state board members wanted to make clear is for voters with special needs that may need our assistance, or for voters who didn't happen to get their ballot in the mail.
Okay, so the idea is that I shouldn't get in the car, go to the Civic Center and vote. I need to do this by mail or drop off my ballot?
Well, again, certainly that is the intent expressed by the state board members at their meeting a few weeks ago, that safety of our voters and of our poll workers who are volunteering to come out in these very trying times and help our voters who need assistance. We'd certainly like to limit it to that. In addition, we will be back at the Midway Room in the Civic Center where we normally have early voting. And even though it's a very large area, when you have to factor in additional equipment, 6-foot social distancing, that line could very quickly build up if there are tens or even hundreds of people in line, and hopefully it won't rain where the line will quickly go out the door. So again, the intent is for voters who really need the help or didn't receive a ballot. And part of that is two other things to help with that is that the governor approved sending out postage paid envelopes to return your ballot for free. I know the instruction packet mentions 2 stamps if you'd like to save the government some money, but it's not required. In addition, next week, the state board is going to deliver some ballot drop-off boxes in Wycomico County. Those should be ready on Thursday, May 21st at the Civic Center outside and outside the Board of Elections. We are at 345 Snow Hill Road in Salisbury.
Yeah, you've got a nice facility right there on Snow Hill Road. It's really easy to access. It's got a big parking lot, so it should be very easy to pull in there and drop off your ballot.
Again, that's the intent, and we've certainly been getting calls from voters who have concerns about not being able to go in person. And again, the vote center will be open June 2nd, but we ask all voters to please consider, we're all asked to sacrifice certain things with these trying times we're going through, and that's one of the things that, not to make it more difficult for. An example is a blind voter who may need to come to the Civic Center and use the ballot marking device. They put on headphones and they're able to cast an audio ballot with instructions through the headphones, and it gives them more independence. They're not able to do that with a mail-in ballot. So again, the intent is to try to limit it to those voters. And if there's a long line, we'd certainly hate to see them walk away and not have the opportunity to get our assistance.
I know in Wisconsin, they had an in-person election here recently, and there was a lot of concern about safety there. There were some news stories after that some poll workers did become ill. They had to limit polls because the poll workers didn't want to go because of safety concerns. So there were long lines. It seemed like it might have been kind of a debacle, but that explains why it might not be a great idea to have an in-person election right now.
And of our 400 election workers that were already signed up prior to the crisis to work, we've had over 100 volunteer. Again, they're very dedicated to the process and to our voters, and they want to be able to be there and give assistance to our special needs voters, and we certainly appreciate that. And for their safety, the fewer people they have to interact with, especially asymptomatic persons, the much better that they don't get it or inadvertently take it home to their families when they're trying to do their civic duty during this crisis.
Now, of course, there's always suspicions about mail-in voting in terms of fraud. But when you were before the county council recently, you made that declaration, which everyone should know. When you go to vote in person, you sign a document, but you're also signing your election form stating that you are who you are and that no fraud is being committed.
That's correct. You're signing under penalty of perjury that you are that person. Now, other states have implemented vote by mail over several election cycles, and they've added additional security measures. One that comes to mind is a computer program that can verify or at least compare a signature to what we have on file, similar to the FBI's fingerprint computer program, I would imagine. But you're talking about a process that's been in place, and procurement and programming and testing. We were given this mandate in less than 60 days to do this. So we're working with the tools we have, the resources, and of course the current Maryland election laws. And very, very quickly, we're going to have to turn around and figure out, just like the rest of the country, how are we going to do this in November? So we hear the concerns. We absolutely understand. There are some things that unfortunately they require money, computer programming and contracts and new machinery, maybe new PCs. I don't know the details, but with state budgets across the country being taxed during this crisis or challenged during this crisis, asking for a couple more $1 million is definitely going to be a difficult decision for our policymakers. But on the local level, for the 24 jurisdictions, we stand ready to conduct our elections as we normally do, and under whatever the current Maryland election laws or regulations are. And if they change, we're very happy to change with them.
I think you're kind of lucky in this cycle that this primary, at least, there's not a lot of controversy. It seems like the Democratic nominee is established, certainly the Republican nominee. There's only a couple local races. You've got some unchallenged people for county council. So it might be a good time. There might not be a lot of intensity in this election, and it might get you prepared for the November ballot.
That's a good point. And another thing to mention is that in Wicomico County, only Democrat and Republican voters are eligible in this primary. So it would be a shame for a voter to not get a ballot and go to the Civic Center and stand in that line, or make that line even longer, get to the front, and we look them up in the poll book in the midway room and say, oh, I'm sorry, you're Libertarian or Green Party or unaffiliated, you're not eligible to vote. So one way that voters can check if they have not received their ballot is to go to the Maryland State Board of Elections website at www.elections.maryland.gov. A lot of people are sitting at home. I'm sure they're anxiously awaiting the 5 o'clock opening tomorrow evening. But in the meantime, you can certainly go before June 2nd and look up, are you registered? Do we have your correct address? If there's a reason to change or affiliate, if you're unaffiliated or a third party, you can make address changes and party changes up until Wednesday, May 27th. That's the new deadline for the June primary.
I assume I'm also going to be getting at some point maybe a list of what is on the ballot. That usually comes to inform me.
Right, but I'm glad you mentioned that. No, for this election, again, with that time period being so short, we are not sending out the regular sample ballot that a voter usually gets. And the reason those sample ballots are sent out is because we only get maybe 5, 6, or 7% persons voting absentee. The majority want to go to their polling place on election day. So the main reason is to give them their ballot ahead of time so they can look at the candidates. That's not going to happen for this June primary. And the reason is, in your ballot packet, which voters should have already gotten if you're registered Democrat, Republican in Wicomico, and it has your actual ballot. So that's an official ballot for you to mark and either put it through the postal system after next Thursday, May 21st, put it in the drop-off box if you prefer to do that. Or again, if you're unaffiliated or not Democrat, Republican, make that change online. Online is the quickest, easiest way to get that ballot to you if you need to do that.
Anthony, tell me the dates again. When do I have to have everything in? Like if I want to drop it off, what is that date that is due?
So next Thursday, May 21st, the state is supposed to be delivering 2 drop-off boxes for voters to use after next Thursday, the 21st. If a voter wants to change their address or change their party affiliation, that date is Wednesday, May 27th, and our ballots need to be back to us by June 2nd. Now, it can be postmarked on June 2nd. However, if you go to the post office, say at 3 o'clock or so, that might not be postmarked until the next day. I don't know what the local post office procedures are. So we certainly advise voters, if you're going to get those to us as soon as possible, please don't wait for those deadlines.
You know, so many people don't understand, and I'm always surprised, they don't seem to realize that our elections are locally controlled and financed. They think it's done by the federal government, and it's not.
We are not going to be spending the money locally that we would renting polling places, again, hiring about 400 persons to staff all those locations. We didn't have 8 days of early voting, unfortunately, so that's more savings that we will have. However, now with all the PPE equipment and the hand sanitizer and the plastic shields that we're having to buy, the postage paid, so it's going to be close. We probably will save money on the current fiscal year, but we won't know that until probably a couple months afterward. But there are some places where we're not going to have to spend on our local budget.
If I don't get a ballot in the mail, what do I do?
Certainly call us. Our office number is 410-548-4830. But it's just as quick and easy to go online to www.elections.maryland.gov. You can look it up on the Maryland State Board of Elections website, and that will tell you, do we have your correct address? Are you registered as a Democrat or Republican in Wicomico County? And then you might want to follow that up if necessary with a phone call. But again, the sooner the better to take care of that, give you enough time to get that ballot back to us.
And you all will be announcing the results on that Tuesday night, June 2nd.
That's another difference for this election in that the governor approved the state board plan to allow us to start processing these ballots prior to election day. That will all be live streamed, available to the public to watch us do that. If they go to our Wicomico County Elections Department webpage, the information on how to log on to do that will be available. But as you mentioned, we will not report results until the vote center closes on Tuesday night, June 2nd. However, we don't anticipate that we'll be able to process approximately 50,000 ballots, which are about what were sent out in Wicomico County voters. We don't believe we'll be able to finish between now and June 2nd. So every day that we continue on after that process, the state board will be releasing those partial results.
Well, Anthony Gutierrez, thank you so much for your hard work during this difficult time, and we'll really be thinking about you as you go into all this, and I'm sure we'll talk again before the fall, because that's going to be another interesting time in terms of voting and selecting our new leader. So thank you so much for being here today to talk to us, and good luck as you go through this.
Thank you very much for having me.
Joining us now in the studio is the man of the hour, not in the studio actually, we're doing this remote, Mayor Jake Day from Salisbury. Welcome, sir.
Hey, Greg, thanks for having me. How are you?
So on the front page of my favorite newspaper this week, we've got a story about your 5 o'clock little news conference that you do every day on social media. It's really taken off. People love to watch this thing. I watch it because I learn so much every day from watching it. And yesterday the discussion, of course, was what's happening with the governor going into phase 1 of the reopening. Do you want to talk about what that means for all of us?
Yeah, sure. First of all, thank you. My favorite newspaper carried that article too. And it was interesting, I think, to learn, and maybe, maybe people do know this, that it's informative, but I think to some people it's also a lighthearted moment and part of routine. And I think we're all looking for routine. So So that that helps, I hope, in some way in the process of feeling healthy and normal as we go through this. But Greg, with respect to the governor's order, phase one is clearly a cautious step in the right direction, or in the reopening direction, based upon the four cornerstones of the roadmap to reopening being in place, or at least steps being taken in the right direction to the point where the governor felt like we could do this. And then the two metrics that the governor has set, meaning the number of ICU admissions and daily deaths declining for a 14-day period.
It frustrates me because people don't seem to know the governor has a plan. It's been sort of like laid out for a while, and we have to reach these certain steps.
You're absolutely right, Greg. I think one of the things the governor has done well is taking the time to do planning in advance of these moments striking, and to communicate them. So there is a plan. It is clear. And I think the clarity of that plan only holds up, though, until the moment there are questions. And there are good questions coming from people. Well, what about this? Why not that? Don't you understand how this type of business works? And this, it just doesn't make sense to lump them in to such and such. And the points are great. And it's another reminder that, I think broad brushstrokes with policymaking and governance never do well, and you got to get into the details. And so it's a critical moment to say at each of these stages, what about being flexible when good points are made? Because there's no way that a comprehensive 3-page order is going to cover all of the things that it needs to cover. And so I'm getting questions about nail salons. Why are they different from hair salons? I'm getting questions about tanning. We have 3 tanning businesses in Wycomico County, all in Salisbury. And those 3 businesses are saying, wait a minute, we have to spray with a bleach substance, spray down everything that someone touches between each customer already, and we're not included. That doesn't make sense. And I agree with them. And then there's the question of outdoor dining for restaurants. We worked our tails off yesterday to prepare an entire application process for 24-hour turnaround on restaurants expanding their outdoor premise. We got the Board of License Commissioners to agree to work with us, and only for that not to be announced after all indications through the Restaurant Association of Maryland was they would be included. So there are some real questions, some real concerns, some real moments of, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense, particularly when we see something like churches reopening at 50% capacity, which presents a whole host of questions about, at what point do you cut off the masses as they're coming in and say, you get to worship, you don't. And let me add that if you look at the outbreaks around the world, and if you look at the ones that have really been traced well, churches are not a place you want to open right away. We all want our freedom of religion to be protected and preserved, but they are the hotbed of outbreaks in other cities, and we got to be careful. So, I think one of the things that we'll do after this is to say, hey, we still recommend, we'll give you public space for outdoor services, free, as large as you want to spread out and hold your services. We still recommend you don't go inside. People are going to do it, and not everybody's going to avail themselves of the outdoor option, but we're going to make recommendations. And that's where we move forward. This is what we do. Over the next 24 hours, we'll publish a joint Wycomico County, City of Salisbury accompanying plan that says, hey, here are the guidelines for this type of business, this type of business, this type of business, and saying, that's what we recommend. These are not restrictions or laws. These are recommendations, but here's how you can get there safely and how we can keep these numbers down.
I know you face this every day on this social media. You do this FaceTime thing where people ask the same questions all the time, and you have to answer the same questions, and you do it with remarkable patience. I don't know how you do it.
Well, thank you for that. And sometimes I don't feel like I'm patient. So it's I appreciate hearing that I come across as patient because while it can be frustrating, I do understand, and not everybody catches everything. And there's so much information. The volume is unbelievable of what we need to communicate and how fast we need to communicate it. And so right now we're in there's so many waves of this, and right now the wave we're in is a policy wave, right? We're talking about what interpretation of the governor's executive orders, and it makes it very difficult to one, explain, but then it's frustrating to have people interpret that as we're justifying. We're trying to explain and communicate and tell people what is and what we understand, not tell people what we think or what we believe. If people want to know my opinion, I'll share it. But my opinion doesn't matter that much here. What matters is interpreting the governor's orders as effectively as we can, and then providing feedback and saying, wait a minute, we think X, Y, and Z should be reconsidered, which is something that Wayne Strausberg and I just did in a message to Steve Hsu this morning. We said, can you please consider this, and this? And hopefully we'll get some positive feedback from that. I understand the frustration, and you gotta try to have empathy for the pain people are feeling, and I do. I also just hope people understand that we've been working day and night, sleeplessly for 9 weeks, trying hard to not only preserve public life, preserve public health and safety, but also to try to do the very best we can to be ready to get the economy going again. You got to remember, we had some of the best metrics we've ever had in our history in this region leading into this thing. So undercutting our own economic trajectory is the absolute last thing I would want. The last thing. If you had given me a list of things to happen, I probably would have picked pandemic over, undercutting our economy, because I didn't, none of us know what a pandemic would be like. And now I recognize, and really in the first minutes of this, we recognize you can't put life below economic recovery. So you got to do everything you can to protect health and safety. But please understand, nobody wants any economic damage. Nobody wants that. And so I am hopeful we're making the right decisions to recover. And I'm also eager to announce some of the things that I think at the beginning of next week we will have ready to say, here's some of the things that we can do to begin to set a stage for taking the next step of a better economy and an economic recovery. And it'll be steps. And this is going to roll out over the course of years, I think. The damage that's done is not going to be repaired overnight.
The Facebook Live that you do every day at 5, it's around 5 you get started. I noticed there's between 80 and 150 people who look at it. Some days you get some cranks in there who ask crazy questions. Other days everyone's very nice. It's always informative, and I'm so jealous of it because as a newspaper reporter guy, that's what I got to do for years. Call you, ask you questions, and then put in the paper. Now people can ask you directly. And what fascinates me in terms of a leadership diagram that's going on here is that when you don't know, you say, I don't know. And when it's something you don't agree with, the governor's done, you say, I don't agree with it, but that's the law. The law is the law. We have to follow the law. And you also do this thing where you become this consumer advocate. People will ask you every day about, what do I do about filing for unemployment? And you give them the link. And I think it's when you go in and help them do the steps to get through the links to file for unemployment. It's just incredible what's going on. And I wonder how it's going to change how we communicate, post-pandemic.
Well, thank you for recognizing the value of some of that. And it is such an interesting dynamic between media and elected officials, or really the source of any information for media, right? But particularly as an elected official who, my constituency needs and deserves direct access. I think it does change the dynamic to some degree, but it doesn't diminish or delegitimize the value of official media sources, in my opinion. I think there's a time and a place for direct communication, and maybe right now that is high frequency, high volume, and perhaps that persists. But there is still value, I think, in the legitimacy of focus and attention that is provided by official media outlets to say, hey, this deserves discussion and depth on a particular topic. And that's not something that that I can provide about the subjects that I'm working on. Because what I think is important doesn't mean that media collectively or the community should think is important. So I think it is a change in dynamic, and I don't mean to be too philosophical, but I think, Greg, it's a really interesting topic, and again, I don't look at it as undercutting media. I think it just changes that dynamic a little bit. So to your other point about saying I don't know, I was always taught as a leader, you don't BS the troops. You tell them what you know and what you don't know, and when you don't know, you go find out. And so we've been trying to do a lot of that, is just getting answers for folks. And then on unemployment, I've got a spreadsheet here on my computer right now with 19 active cases of people, not all of whom, some of whom maybe live in Salisbury, but most who don't, who have tuned in and asked for help, and who I've connected to a different delegate or senator. And our delegates and senators and their staff are directly going through the process, sitting on the line with these folks. And I really can't, I can't compliment that strongly enough, how important that kind of constituent service is. And look, these are jobs where constituent service is part of the fundamental of what they do, but let's not diminish the importance of that. I'm going to sit on the phone and work through this problem with you, as tough as it is. They've got a lot of things pulling at them too. But for our legislators to do that, I think is really, really kind.
You're able to get information that they're able to decline me, because you're a decision maker and you have to know that information and you have to tell people. And it's just been really helpful to me in terms of knowing what's going on.
Well, and I think there was a little discomfort with my revealing that early on, or, for a moment there.
Yeah.
And a little tension around that. And, I just simply had to say, I'm going to keep doing it. And the hospital continued to push all the information that we heard wasn't going to be pushed. They kept doing it. They kept doing it. And so I kept sharing it. I have maintained that there's no sensitive or secret information here. What I know, you should know. And I think that should continue. And to their credit, those communication lines have reopened, and we're all firing, I think, on all cylinders, and we're doing it in synchronicity.
Meanwhile, life goes on in Salisbury today. Two things to close on. You named the new bear, and they're finally paving the final paving coat, whatever you call it.
I did just see the Washington Post ran a story about the various bears, Andean bears in the country. And so we've got quite a lineage connected to the Salisbury Zoo of Andean bears. And yes, we do have a new baby bear. And as far as paving, yes, they are right now doing the final pave on North and South Division and the intersection of Main and Division streets. The next thing that will happen is they'll cut in the brick crosswalks there after a few days or weeks. They have to let it set. And then they're going to do base paving as well for the first half of the block of the plaza. And then that'll just leave the finishing touches on the first half of that block, and then the final work at the bottom of the hill. And we'll have a finished streetscape project.
Can you explain that a little more detail so people can understand why they can't see the bear?
Sure. They don't work shift work the way police officers or firefighters do. So the staff we have is the staff we have. If the virus gets into the zookeepers and we start losing zookeeper staff, then we run into a problem where we're understaffing the critical health and feeding of our animals. It's not something we can let happen. So it's not so much about spread between patrons that we're worried about. It's spread to zookeepers that we're worried about. So as soon as we think we can open safely, we will, I promise. We want everything to be open. We just have to take it cautiously.
He's Mayor Jake Day. Thank you so much for all you're doing through this crisis. I can't say enough about how you're doing.
Just trying to stay supportive of our friends and community-wide. So we'll be here, and thank you for helping to share the message of whether it's coming from the state or coming from us. We appreciate you too. Thank you, Greg.
I'm Greg Bassett from the Salisbury Independent newspaper, another edition of One-on-One right here on PAC 14.
First Shore Federal is proud to support PAC 14 and one-on-one. We'd encourage every business to support PAC 14 and pick a program and support it, and let's make a difference.